I'm a carpenter in my small town, and I've usually gotten mail on my doorstep. Usually letters from people who want certain things made, along with measurements for, well, benches, tables, stools, the works. I usually got mail from people needing some sort of furniture. Some asking for a woodcut statue, and the list goes on. But it all changed one day in mid-July when I got a rhythmic 3 knocks on my door. Of course, in the middle of another client's work, I paused, then went to my door and opened it to see a small cardboard box about the size of a brick. I picked up the small box and walked into my dining room. I put the box on the table. Me being curious, I opened the box, seeing 2 VHS tapes. I smiled a small bit, knowing I had a dusty old VHS player in the garage. I set the tapes down and went to my garage, around my car, and into some old boxes I still hadn't unpacked from moving in 6 months prior. I grabbed the VHS, along with all the required cords, and went to my living room, ready to see what these tapes were. Though the label on one of the tapes said, "The Wheel of Misfortune, Episode 1. I assumed it was some sort of reality game show, but now I wish I'd never kept the damn player. I popped the tape in and sat down in front of the television and watched as the VHS player made a slight mechanical whir, the tape sputtering to life onto the screen. There was a man. He was very pale, very tall and broad-shouldered, with a lanky form. He looked as though he had not ate for many days, his build seeming as though it was just skin and bone. He was wearing a black suit along with jet black hair he had slicked back with gel. After a few seconds he spoke with a confident yet sort of eerie smile on his face, with his eyes as wide as saucers. Something wasn't right. "Hello, viewers! As you know, the premiere of our show starts today." His hands clasping together. "Our 4 willing contestants are completely aware of what this show entails, and has signed a waiver, our terms of service, so to say." I was slightly put off by his highlight of "they are fully aware of what this show entails." What was so important they needed to sign a waiver on a game show for? I got thirsty, so I paused the tape and poured myself some coffee, and I noticed upon further examination of the tapes a strange symbol carved on the top of the left-hand corner of the second tape. It looked like a standing raven with a circle around it. I shrugged and took a picture of it for safekeeping. I poured the coffee and sat down in front of the TV. I noticed the symbol was on the tape was also a button on the host's suit. I brushed it aside and thought to myself, this is a game show, not a conspiracy. I took a sip and pressed play. He continued, "And those who have made it to the end of our show will win a cash prize. We know the show has been long awaited by all those who are watching, so without further ado, the Wheel of Misfortune." He did jazz hands just before the scene cut to interviews of the 2 girls. One was blonde and preppy, and the other kept to herself and was a brunette. And out of the men, both had dirty blonde hair, though one looked in his mid-50s and the other looked like a 20-year-old bodybuilder. I fast-forwarded until the scene cut again to a narrator informing the audience about the layout of the contestants' quarters. The bedrooms were all lined 2 on each side of a hallway. The 1 guy, 1 girl on each side, the bathroom being at the bottom of the hallway. Before the hallway was a kitchen, which was just counter and appliances. The counter, the only thing separating the kitchen from the living room, having nothing but a couch. After the house was mapped, the 4 walk out of their rooms and go to the kitchen, seeing a large wheel, maybe 5 foot in diameter, and 8 sections, though it was difficult to read, so I brushed it aside, sipped my coffee, and continued watching. The blonde read aloud 3 sections. A smoker's lungs, brain matter, left thigh? The look on her face was of straight disgust, and I wondered what I was about to witness. There was a loud buzz, then a voice came over the loudspeaker. "Hello, contestants. Sarah, please spin the wheel." Sarah, being the shyer of the two girls, the brunette, stepped up and spun the wheel, the arrow clicking away at the separate options on the wheel. It ended on severed fingers. The girl cringed, and the announcer chuckled a small bit as the shutter door in the ceiling opened, and around 6 severed human fingers fell onto the kitchen counter. Sarah, the brunette, looked at them and screamed. The older man cringed a small bit as the announcer came over the loudspeaker again. "Now eat all of them to move on." The girl shook her head. The buff guy shrugged and walked to the counter. Protein's protein. He picked one up and reluctantly ate it. At first I thought it had to be fake, but it cut to a scene where the fingers came from. A morgue. They showed footage of slicing the fingers off of a dead body. I gagged and looked away as the crunching of the finger between his teeth made me shiver. The man smiled, blood on his cheek from sloppily eating. "That's delicious," he said, digging in, eating all 6 fingers. I look in abject horror as the blonde girl starts sobbing, realizing what the other sections mean. She puts her hand over her mouth and stumbles to the bathroom as the camera blurs over her face over the toilet, obviously throwing up from the sights she had just seen. Sarah went to her room and sat on her bed for around 2 or 3 minutes before laying down and trying to go to sleep, but her eyes, from what I could tell, were wider than paper plates. The buffer of the 2 men had finished the meal of severed fingers, and I gagged again, trying to keep my pizza from the night before in my stomach. The older man shook his head. The camera cut to a quad screen of all 4 contestants sleeping. Apparently this was before the film was edited fully, so the film went on with nothing but the 4 sleeping contestants. So I fast-forwarded until the next morning. The contestants stumbled out of bed except the brunette. She stayed in bed despite the loud rain. The 3 stumble to see what's for breakfast, and the man comes on the loudspeaker again. "Chris, please spin the wheel." The buff guy spins the wheel as fast as he could, letting out a grunt as he watched as the wheel slowly spun to a stop, landing on the section entitled Children's Forearms. He smiled as the shutter door opened again, and 3 small forearms fell onto the kitchen counter. He pounces on his meal and eats up, licking his fingers as though he just finished an entire bag of Cheetos. He looked and rubbed his tummy afterwards as the blonde looked on in horror. She ran and pounded on the metal door that was apparently the exit. "Let me out of here!" she screamed as she started bawling her eyes out. A loud voice over the loudspeaker sounded. "Code 304, execute." The blonde looked up at the door from where she had fallen due to her knees buckling, and in the small hole of the door, a shotgun barrel. A short scream could be heard, until a loud blast cut it off, and brain matter of the blonde was launched in all directions. Unfortunately, the tape wasn't edited enough to censor this, so her dead, twitching body laid on the tile, blood seeping onto the floor. I wanted to stop the tape, but somehow I just couldn't do it. I kept watching as the tape cut back to the kitchen, where the older man approached the counter and spoke. What's so bad about this?" he said, eating a spare finger that had fallen into the floor. That is delicious," he said, looking up at the shutter door in the ceiling. "Too bad that's all the food." My stomach turned, and the chips I had been eating had suddenly turned rotten and nasty in my head, as the thought of human fingers being considered food was just twirling around in my brain. The buff guy and the older man looked at each other, and then the dead corpse of the blonde and grin ear to ear as they both in unison start walking menacingly towards the body like a lion slowly maneuvering towards dead prey. They both pounce on the body like a cluster of Big Macs on the floor. Soon enough, they finish eating one of their fellow contestants, leaving nothing but bones and scraps of muscle tissue on the floor. They look at each other with animalistic looks in their eyes and start walking towards Sarah's room, where she had finally drifted off to sleep. They slowly open her door and walk in. The cameras switch to a green night vision filter as they hover over her in her sleep as they smile, then pounce, as they both start grabbing and biting her as she screams and squirms in agony. As the two maniacs rip her to shreds, eating her flesh as she cries out, but not being fazed by her screams, they proceed to start at the hands and move up from there. Her screams slowly silence as she passes away, slowly and painfully. The screen went black as the tape clicked to stop. I watched the black screen for about 5 minutes. I took out the tape and looked at the symbol again. I looked it up and found a web forum of a company called Crow's Claw, a networking company, and I turned the tapes into the police. A few days later, my mother went missing. 2 days later, my brother, then my fiance, and then my father. I got our delivery 2 weeks later after their disappearance. It was a package of VHS tapes with the same symbol and a message: "You're next," along with Teddy. Teddy is one of my childhood friends who never left me after high school. He's pretty much one of the only friends I have. I immediately called him. "Teddy, listen, don't leave your house. Don't go anywhere." "What's up?" "Just do it." "Alright, jeez." I called him every day after that as a checkup and explained what was going on. That was 2 weeks ago, and I'm still terrified. But I have been noticing a black van following me around town.